Welcome to my channel. My name is Meiko. The main point of this video series is to talk about the things I found in the manga FULLMETAL Alchemist that I could find because I am a Japanese person. For example, it could be a joke on the Japanese language or something related to the Japanese culture. You can enjoy FULLMETAL Alchemist without knowing about them, but I want to talk about things that might be more interesting if you know about them. I will also talk about the parts that I suppose are difficult to translate directly into other languages, so I would appreciate it if you could tell me how the parts are actually translated into your language. For this video, I will talk about Volume 3. Please have a copy of the manga ready if you have one. It would be easier to follow what I am talking about. Let me start with the titles for each chapter. 第9話、家族の待つ家。家族 is family and 待つ is wait. The English word for 家 would be either house or home. When I looked up the meaning of 家, I found that it said a building where people live. So I think house is probably closer to the dictionary meaning. But there is a word, kate in Japanese, that is actually written using the kanji ie and has the meaning of place of family life. And I personally think that ie also has this nuance of kate. And I think this word kate is rather close to the meaning of home in English. So, I don't think it's wrong to translate it either way. Anyway, the chapter title can be A House Where the Family Waits or A Home Where the Family Waits. It would be great if you could tell me which one is actually used in the comments. Next, 第10話、賢者の石。Actually, I explained this in the previous video, but Philosopher's Stone is often translated in Japanese as Kenja no Ishi. Literal translation, Sage's Stone. For more details, please check the link to the previous video and watch the part where I talk about chapter 8. Next, 第11話、二人の守護者。二人 means two people and 守護者 is guardian. So I think it can be translated directly as two guardians. Next, 第12話、人間の定義。First of all, the mark like this shape, which is called 鍵括弧, is used in the same way as a quotation mark in English. So the word 人間 human written in these marks is better written in quotation marks in English. The word 定義 means definition, so it can be translated as definition of human. And last, there is a bonus chapter in this volume 3, so let me check the title of that one as well. 外伝軍部祭り. First of all, the part corresponding to the other chapter, which is usually 第 number は in Japanese, is set to gaiden in this chapter. The word gaiden originally meant notes and additional information outside of biography, because the kanji that reads gai means outside, and biography is denki in Japanese. Nowadays, as used here, a story that has nothing to do with the main story of the manga is sometimes called gaiden. And the title of this gaiden is Gunbu Matsuri. But do you notice anything? It's a small thing, but there's no no in it. This is the only chapter without a no in the chapter title in the first 3 volumes of FULLMETAL Alchemist so far. This is something I talked about in the very first video about the title of the FULLMETAL Alchemist, but most of the chapter titles of FULLMETAL Alchemist have no in them, perhaps to match the name of the manga, Hagane no Renkinjutsu, Japanese title of FULLMETAL Alchemist. And actually, the title of this gaiden is almost the same in meaning when we say Gunbu no Matsuri with the no in it. It is my own guess, but I think that perhaps because it is a bonus chapter, Arakawa sensei did not feel the need to include the no like other normal chapters. The title Gunbu Matsuri can be translated as military festival because Gunbu is military and Matsuri is festival. That's all about chapter titles. Now let me explain what I found interesting in the manga itself. Let's start with chapter 9. The first scene I want to talk about is after Ed and Al have returned to Reasonable and they have finished their deal to repair Ed's oatmeal. Major Armstrong and Pinako Batchan have a conversation while Ed goes with Dan to visit his mother's grave. Near the end of the conversation, Batchan tells the Major that Ed and Al have no house to return to. As for why Ed burned down his own house without a trace, Batchan guesses that by losing the house, they made sure they could not go back. The Japanese word for lose is nakusu. This Japanese word nakusu itself not only has the meaning of lose, but also has a similar meaning to the English word eliminate. And this nakusu has several kanji. The first one, nakusu, is this. This kanji can be used to mean both lose and eliminate. On the other hand, the other nakusu only has the meaning of lose. And the word nakusu in Bachan's dialogue is this nakusu. But actually, when we learn this kanji in compulsory education, we learn it in the reading shitsu or ushinau. The reading nakusu may not be taught there. It is a bit complicated, but in Japan, there is a set of kanji and their readings that can be used in official documents and in the press. This is basically what is taught in compulsory education. However, there are so many other kanji and ways of reading them, and writing in the right kanji and reading as nakusu is one of such cases. In fictional storytelling such as novels and manga, the use of kanji and reading is more free. So I think that in Bachan's dialogue here, by using nakusu, which only has the meaning of lose, the sense of loss is emphasized even more. Then I'll move on. The next scene I'm going to focus on is Ed's new oatmeal being attached to his body. When Winley talks about how wonderful the oatmeal is, Ed says, "You are a mechanical otaku." To which Winley replies, "Shut up, you alchemy otaku." I wonder how this otaku is translated into other languages. Recently, the word otaku has been used a lot in non-Japanese people's videos, but I don't think the word otaku is used as it is here. Just to confirm, an otaku is a person who is extremely passionate about a particular thing. Originally, the word was used for subcultures, but in Japan it is now used for a wide and various things. But when the word otaku is used without adding any word before otaku, unlike Ed and Winley's mechanical otaku and alchemy otaku mentioned earlier, most people still think of anime, manga, or idol lovers. The next scene I will explain is the one where everyone is having a meal together after Ed and Al's sparring is over. Ed tells them that he will be taking the first train to Central the next morning. Then he says, "When I get back to my normal body, Button and Winley will be no use to me." I think it was probably Button who said, "You said it, kid," to return to that, but I am not sure if it was Button or Winley who said the next line. Because, as I mentioned in the past video, Winnie and Button have the same first person, "atashi." Personally, I think the two dialogues replying to Ed on the page sounds like Button's word from the tone, so I thought the next line was from Winnie. I'll leave it up to your interpretation, but in Japanese, the line isだいたい私たち整備士がいないと何もできないくせにこのチンクシャは。Roughly speaking, it is saying you can't do anything without us mechanics. I want to explain the nuance of the word chinksha at the end of the original Japanese sentence, which is kind of a bad word. There are various theories about the origin of the word chinksha, but one theory is that chin is a type of small dog called chin, which has a face with eyes, nose, and mouth inclined toward the center. It looks a bit like a Pekingese. And about what ksha means, it is this. Do you get it? It is a sneeze. In Japanese, we call sneezing kushami, and it is said that kusha comes from that. Chinkusha means a face like a chin sneezing, or in other words, ugly, and is used to mock a person's appearance. It is not a very nice word. Although this may be a personal feeling, perhaps because one of its origin is said to be a face like a chin sneezing. Such a face may not be very pretty, but it does have a certain charm. So chinkusha is indeed a bad word, but I feel that it is a kind of teasing with love, or at least less offensive than busaiku, the Japanese word for ugly. But you should not use chinkusha to say it to others in real life, because teasing with love is something you can only do when you have a deep relationship. In English and other languages, I believe there are also curse words that you really should never say to others, and bad words that you use to your close fellow when you make casual remarks to each other. And I personally would say that chinkusha is the latter. But we don't use chinkusha very often in our daily lives, partly because it's a bad word, but mainly because it's a bit old. Especially young people may not have heard of it. FULLMETAL Alchemist is a somewhat old manga. It is amazing that it is still popular now, though. Those were the explanations for Chapter 9. Let me start my explanation of Chapter 10 here. The first thing that caught my attention was the phrase Kono Mustang used when he told Hawkeye and Havoc that his stock would go up if they solved the matter of Scar. In Japanese, the phrase is Gai o motte ri to nasu, which is a bit difficult to translate, but since he says right after that, I will use everything I can for my promotion. You can guess that it means something like make a bad situation into an opportunity. Actually, I thought this was a phrase that originally existed as kind of a saying, but I think Arakawa sensei probably made it up because it didn't come up when I searched for it. The first reason I misunderstood was that the phrase closed with kagikakko. The Japanese kagikakko mark, which I explained a little earlier when I was checking chapter titles, is also sometimes used to quote words, including saying. So I thought it was a kind of saying. Another reason is that the wording of the phrase is a bit old-fashioned. Not to say classical, but a bit different from the way it is often used in modern everyday conversation. And when it comes to idioms or sayings, they are often kept in a rather old-fashioned way because they have been used from the old days. It is difficult to explain this feeling to non-Japanese, but if you listen carefully to dramas and anime set in the Sengoku period or a similar period, you may notice that they speak slightly different from those set in modern Japan. The phrase here, 害をもって利となす, is a bit close to that. It was just an excuse for my misunderstanding. But maybe it's actually a quote from an old saying or something. I just couldn't find it. The next scene I will look at jumps around pages to a scene where Hughes comes to visit Ed and Al as they try to crack the code for Dr. Malko material. Hughes complains, I told you to come see me when you came to Central, and tells them that he was actually busy as well. Hughes expresses this by saying, there have been a lot of cases and things going on lately, and the court martial where I work has been tentekomai. The word tentekomai means very busy and rushing around. Mai means something like dance, or more specifically, traditional Japanese dance. And I didn't know about the tentacle part, but I looked it up and there's a theory that it comes from the sound of a small drum. It is said that the word tentekomai came from the way the dancers danced along with the sound of the drums without a break. So it expresses the busy state. Personally, I always thought the sound of tentekomai was kind of cute, so I thought I would give a little explanation about it. That's all for chapter 10. I will then move on to explaining chapter 11. On the first page of the chapter, there is a sentence about the Philosopher's Stone. There is a line that says, the stone as red as blood, and I want to talk a little bit about the Japanese expression for red color. The Japanese equivalent of the English word red is aka. It may be a little unclear on your screen, sorry about that. It may look a bit different depending on the monitor, but can you see three slightly different red colors in a row? You can say aka for all such reddish colors. On the other hand, the kanji that reads beni or kurenai is used for reds like the one on the left. Not just that particular one color, but a red similar to it. In English, it would be deep red or crimson. Red like the one on the right, a little orangey red, perhaps vermilion or scarlet in English would be close. Such a red is sometimes called shuiro. Iro means color, using this kanji. This shuiro is also not the word for a single color, and if the color is close enough, it can be called shuiro. But it is indeed strange to call a color like the beni on the left shuiro. Kanji on both sides can be read as aka, just like the one in the middle. But generally, it is the kanji in the middle for the word aka, and it is a bit specific to read the kanji on both sides as aka. The aka in the line, 血のごとき赤き石 in English, the stone as red as blood, is written with the kanji beni. When translating it into English or other languages, it is difficult to choose whether to use the basic red from the reading aka or to use a color name such as crimson from the kanji used. Please let me know how it is actually done. Next, the page jumps a bit to the scene of a conversation between Ed and Al, who are both depressed after learning that the ingredient for the Philosopher's Stone is a living human being. In this conversation, Ed says it seems that God really hates people who break the taboo. Actually, I talked about this in the explanation of chapter 7 in the previous video, the one about volume 2, but the word kamisama, God in English, is usually written in all kanji or only kami in kanji and sama in hiragana. But in Ed's dialogue in both chapter 7 and here, sama is written in katakana like this. In the previous video, I said that writing sama in katakana is kind of cynical, but the way it is used here, it seems more self-abusive than cynical. The next scene I will explain is where Major Armstrong, after hearing the stuff from Maria Ross and Brush, comes over to Ed and Al's room. In response to the Major's heavy knocking on the door, Ed says, 仕方だ仕方, which I think could be translated into English as, let's just ignore him. The word 仕方 comes from hanafuda, literal translation, flower cards. To be honest, I'm not familiar with hanafuda, but it is a traditional Japanese card game that has cards designed with seasonal flowers and plants. The design of the October card of hanafuda shows a deer with autumn leaves, and the deer is looking at the leaves by turning around. The deer is called shika in Japanese, and the number 10 is sometimes counted as to. It is said that this is where the word shikato came from and how it came to mean to turn away from or to ignore. But actually, this word was originally a code word used among gamblers and yakuza, Japanese gangster, because hanafuda was sometimes used for gambling. It spread to delinquent youth and then to young people in general. Therefore, shikato is a kind of slang word. There is a word mushi, which means ignore, and that is used more often. Somehow, I think I would say mushi shiyou yo, using the word mushi to mean let's ignore it. But Ed is a person who would not be surprising to use such a word, shikato. The last part I will explain about chapter 11 is where Ed and Al sneak into the fifth laboratory, and each of them is confronted with enemies. It is not so much to make a stand-alone video about them, but I will explain the way the enemies speak here, because it is a bit characteristic. First of all, number 66, you will see his real name in the next chapter, it's Barry the Chopper, speaks in an even more rough way than Ed. The words he uses are rougher, but what I want to talk about is his unique way of speaking, especially for the end of a sentence. For example, when he tells number 48 that intruders have arrived, he says, "We have guests after such a long time." And the exact Japanese line for that is this. 久しぶりの客が来たぜ. I want you to focus on the end of the sentence because the Japanese language often characterizes with the end of a sentence. In this sentence, you can also take out the ze at the end and say 久しぶりの客が来た. This makes it sounds more like a sentence describing a situation rather than talking to someone. Adding yo at the end of the sentence and saying 久しぶりの客が来たよ gives the impression that the person is speaking to someone, and also it is a subtle difference. Adding wa before yo and saying 久しぶりの客が来たわよ makes it sound more feminine. It is rather manlike to add ze and say 久しぶりの客が来たぜ. I think it might also add ze to his lines in some scenes. But Barry the Chopper's line here is even more unique in that he stretches the end like ze. In Japanese, we have several ways to write the sentence with the end sound stretched. It would be very long if I talked about them, so I won't go into detail in this video, but anyway, the impressions are slightly different depending on the way they are written. In Barry's case, the way he stretches the end of a word feels a little nasty. Barry's buddy, number 48 Slicer, didn't speak as roughly as Barry, but the words he uses are a bit samurai-like. It may be difficult for non-Japanese to understand what a samurai-like way of speaking is, but in short, he uses a little old-fashioned words and has a slightly exaggerated way of speaking. For example, on the last page of chapter 11, Slicer says, いざ参る to Ed, and it can be translated into English as here I go. But the way he says that is a little old-fashioned, and to make it more modern, it could be said 行くぞ or 行くぜ. Personally, I think the reason Slicer speaks that way is because his weapon is a katana. I don't know if there are separate words for sword and katana in English or any other language, but in Japanese they are different in concept. The word for sword in Japanese is written with this kanji and is read ken or tsurugi. As this word is translated as sword in English, it has blades on both sides like a Western sword. On the other hand, katana has only one blade. It is so-called Nihonto, Japanese katana. The first when it comes to the person who uses katana is a samurai, so I thought that Arakawa-sensei made Slicer as a character speak in a slightly old-fashioned way like a samurai. Those were my explanations for chapter 11. Then I will explain chapter 12. The first scene I want to talk about jumps to the middle of the chapter. Barry asks Al, did a person named Alphonse Eric really exist, to get him upset. To which Al replies, what about you? Then Barry kills the security guard who shows up and answers, 我殺すゆえに我あり. This is a twist on the famous phrase of the French philosopher Descartes. Sorry, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name right, but I believe the phrase is I think, therefore I am in English, which is translated into Japanese as 我思うゆえに我あり. So I think 我殺すゆえに我あり should be translated into English as I kill, therefore I am, because the word for think, 思う in Japanese has turned into the word 殺す, which means kill. The next scene I will explain is the one where Ed thought he had won the battle by successfully separating the Slicer's head and body, but it turns out that the body part is connected to another soul, his younger brother, and can still move even without the head. I talked a little bit about the way Barry and Slicer, the older brother, speak in my explanation of chapter 11, and Slicer, the younger brother, is not so characteristic compared to the two of them. But he calls his older brother Anija, which is a little samurai-like. Anija is a kind of honorific way to call one's older brother, and it implies respect for the older brother. I introduced several ways to call an older brother in a past video, but there I introduced only Ni-sama, Ni-san, and Ni-chan. But there are actually many more ways to call an older brother in Japanese. For example, Aniue is also a respectful way to call an older brother, and it is also a bit old-fashioned. That is samurai-like. Although it may be a personal feeling, Aniue is a bit more elegant while Anija is a bit more mischievous. Perhaps it is because in Japanese dramas set in the older period, some of both a younger sister and a younger brother call their older brother Aniue, but not as many younger sisters call their older brother Anija as a younger brother does. In short, it sounds like a man's language. I think it's interesting that the way of calling older brother can express the relationship between siblings or the character's personality. That's all for chapter 12. Here comes the last chapter of volume 3, the bonus chapter. The outline of this episode is that Ed and Kono Mustang are going to have a simulation battle. Perhaps because the story focuses on a simulation battle, there are some quotes from ancient Chinese military texts that I would like to explain. I am not sure how it is translated in other languages, but in Japanese there is a quote closed with kagekakko mark followed by a short explanation of what it means. It's the same structure as the phrase 害をもって利となす that I mentioned in the explanation for chapter 10. Well, that was why I thought it was a quotation from something in the first place. First, Kono Mustang attacks right after the battle starts. Then the Kono says, 兵は拙速を尊ぶ. The meaning of this phrase is, as the Kono says right after it, it is better to attack quickly and win the battle early. I believe this is a quote from an ancient Chinese military strategy book known in Japan as Sonshi. It is not a direct quotation from the Chinese, but it is summarized and worded in Japanese and has been handed down to the present day. Although 兵は拙速を尊ぶ is in Japanese, it is a kind of old-style phrase that contains words that are not often used in modern times. So most Japanese people can only somewhat understand the meaning of the phrase. Many children may not understand it. Perhaps the phrase could be translated into English as, in battle, it is better to attack quickly. But if so, it doesn't seem so difficult that it needs additional explanation as it does in Japanese. So I'm curious how it is done. The Kono, who attacked immediately, said to Ed, "It is hard to hit a small target, isn't it?" Of course, Ed gets angry. Again, a kind of military tactic is quoted here. 怒らせてこれを乱せ. The meaning of the phrase is make the enemy angry and distracted. This is not a phrase that has become a common saying, but it is a tactic that appears in Sonshi, as in the previous phrase. Later, the colonel, whose right glove was torn by Ed, but who actually wore the glove with the transmutation circle on his left hand as well, said, 兵は軌道なり. This is also derived from Sonshi. The meaning is that battle is a game of deception. At the end, after the simulation battle between Ed and Connor was over and everyone was supposed to clean up, Hughes slipped out of it and had a cup of coffee or something and said, 36系逃げるにしかず. Personally, I think this is the most famous phrase among the quotes from ancient Chinese texts that appeared in this episode. 36 are the 36 tactics described in a certain ancient Chinese text on military tactics. In Japanese, it is called 兵法36系. One of the 36 tactics is said to be, if there is no chance of winning, run away as fast as you can. The phrase 36系逃げるにしかず is saying that the tactic of running away is the best one out of the 36 tactics. This phrase comes from an ancient Chinese history text. In Japan, it is called 南西書. Since several phrases derived from ancient Chinese military tactics were quoted, I think it is a perfect ending to have 36系逃げるにしかず as the punchline. That's all for the bonus chapters. Those were the explanations of Volume 3, chapters 9 to 12, and the bonus chapter of the manga FULLMETAL Alchemist. Please feel free to comment on feedback and questions. This time there was a bonus chapter and I had to simplify some of the explanations a bit because it would be too long, but I would like to bring them up again when I have a chance. The next video will be about Volume 4 of FULLMETAL Alchemist, so please have your copy of the manga ready and come watch it. Thank you for watching so far. I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!